You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name's Trent Fleskins, your host as always. And this week we're going back to basics with an episode that I think we've done maybe a couple of hundred episodes ago, but it's time to refresh it. Laws change, listenership changes and evolves over the years, and we're simply going to talk about what it means to buy a property. And in fact, we might even talk about what it means to sell a property. And what I mean by that is, what are the steps along the way? We know that we need to make an offer to the seller via a sales agent. But what happens after that? Building inspections, verification of identity, just settling the property with Landgate. Who does that? Can we do it ourselves? Who organises the bank and the money? All those questions, they're really basic questions. They're ones that a lot of people might be a bit embarrassed to ask, but they're answers we're going to provide today. And the person that's going to help us with that is someone I have a lot of respect for, an absolute gun in the settlement agency industry. She's actually the head of strategic settlements here at Strategic Property Group. It is Jess McClean. Hello, Jess. How are you?
Hey, Trent. Good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's been a couple of hours since I've been in the office, so I can ask you how you're going.
Yeah.
But it's nice to have you in for your first time in the studio, having a conversation with me, but also with our listenership about what it means to buy a property. It's a pretty daunting task for a lot of people, and I guess most people that it would be relevant to would be first home buyers.
Yeah.
Once you've bought a property, you sort of know the deal.
Yeah.
But for those people who are having a listen, thinking my first investment, my first home, first homeowner grant, stamp duty, all those exciting but also scary parts about the money side and the process side, that's who we're appealing to today, I think.
Definitely.
So first thing I think we need to ask in the most basic way is, what is a settlement agent? Why do we need you when it comes to buying our property?
Basically, a settlement agent is a professional who facilitates the transfer of ownership between a seller and a buyer.
Let's think practically about, hey, I've just bought a property. Real estate agent, can you settle my property for me? Can you talk to Landgate? Answer would be no, right?
No,
you
correct.
need to speak to Jess.
Yeah, you need a settlement agent or a lawyer.
And how would I engage a settlement agent?
You might get referred to us by a real estate agent or a broker or a simple Google search.
Settlement Agents Perth, and you should find a good settlement agent.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, so you go on the website, you're probably going to ask for a quote. A lot of the settlement agencies these days will have an automatic quote system. You put your details in about the property you're buying, what you paid, whether it's a first homeowner, whether it's vacant land, all those things.
Yep, strata.
We'll give you a quote. But it won't just be for our professional fee, will it? There's a lot of other things on that quote that you need to know.
Yeah, there's a lot of government and mandatory charges also included. Stamp duty, inquiry fees, title search fees, Section 110s if it's a strata property. Sellers are a little bit more basic, but there's a lot of government and mandatory fees involved in a purchase settlement.
And I think a lot of first home buyers would get caught off guard there.
Yeah,
They're thinking,
absolutely.
look, the purchase price is $500,000.
Yep.
I may have to pay stamp duty or some stamp duty, I may not. And then after that, I've got to pay this settlement agent $1,000 or something.
Yeah.
That must be it, right?
Yeah.
But no, there's a few of these transfer fees and government fees along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Which will be charged in any transaction.
And the cool thing about the quote we give you is it should therefore tell you, hey, this is the total amount you need to have either via your bank and or your deposit.
Yeah, it gives you a bit of an estimate of what sort of funds you require for the settlement.
Okay, so we got the quote as a buyer or a seller, and obviously we've just bought the property, so congratulations to us. What's a settlement agent doing for us from that point based on, let's say, a standard contract of a 28 days finance approval? What does that mean? How do we get involved as an agent? And maybe another 30 days for settlement after that. How will you guys help me as a client along the way?
Basically, we're the middle person. So we'll be dealing with the real estate agent, broker or banker if finance is applicable. We're dealing with the other side of the transaction, settlement agent. Basically, we're dealing with all parties involved in the transaction. From getting the contract in, if you've appointed us, we'll get a file opened. From there, we'll determine all the specific dates in the contract, deposit due, finance due, building and pest inspections due, and then from there we'll monitor those dates and ensure that they're achieved on time.
And then at the end of the day, when settlement time, work with Landgate, work with the banks with regards to the transfer of title.
Yep, and obviously handing over funds.
Of course.
Yeah.
Most people want to know that, right? So you mentioned a few of the steps along the way that a lot of people's ears would have pricked up then. First thing, deposit. How does that normally happen? I'm the buyer. I've got to pay a deposit. It's probably 10 grand, let's say, on the contract. who am I giving that to?
Usually the real estate agent. However, if it is a private contract, usually the seller's settlement agent will hold those funds in their trust account.
All right, so that deposit isn't just going to the seller's account and they can take it. It's sitting in a trust account from either the selling agent or a settlement agent, and we know that as long as we meet the conditions, we either get that money back or use that for the purchase.
Yep, used towards the purchase. Yep.
Okay, and you mentioned a building inspection and a pest inspection. How will most of our clients tie that into a contract? Are they normally using a standard REWA form? Is it 7 days, 10 days? Is it before finance, after finance? How does that all work?
It really varies per contract. So most of the time you'll notice that the building and pest inspections are due once finance has been obtained. That's just so obviously the buyer's not forking out money if for whatever reason the finance is declined. However, in some contracts it's done prior to the finance being obtained. I'd say usually it's 14 days from acceptance if it's a cash offer, or 14 days from finance being obtained.
Okay, so building inspector goes out there, probably does a pest inspection as well. I think a point of conjecture that we see a lot in the settlement agent space is that if a building inspector brings up 10, 15, 20 cosmetic things, as a buyer, I'd say, well, hang on, that needs to be fixed. There's a mark on the wall, or there's some waterproofing issues, the window's cracked, those sort of things.
Yeah.
How does that relate normally to the building inspection clause that most real estate agents acting on the seller's behalf will get you to sign as a buyer?
This is something that actually comes up very often in our day-to-day operations. A building report will come back. It'll say that there's maintenance or minor defects or even safety hazards that have been noted at the property. However, in a standard building annexure condition in a contract, it actually only covers major structural defects.
So this is a really smart thing that sales agents do, and obviously REWA, representing sellers, they want you as a buyer to sign a contract that gives them really limited liability around the defects in the house. Otherwise, everyone would be getting things fixed all the time.
Absolutely.
So as per the joint form of conditions, which is sort of the Bible of transactions that we all have to stick to in Western Australia, you're right. It's a very limited scope that a buyer can actually come back to the seller on with regards to maintenance issues and non-structural issues if the building inspector brings them up. And that's something that the selling agent presents to you as a buyer and says, well, this is the annexure we want you to use. And then you just sign it. You don't really question it, right?
Yeah.
Most buyers would expect that they're covered a lot more than they actually are, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mention this to my buyers all the time, that these contracts are very much in the seller's best interest. It goes the same for timber pest as well. So only live termite activity or damage to the residential building is covered. So any previous damage outside of that residential building, unfortunately, isn't covered under the contract.
Well, let's dive deeper as well into simply that building inspection. Let's say that we do uncover some major structural issues. You'd like to think as a buyer that you can say, oh, I'm pulling out. But the way that the wording in that contract says that we sign as buyers generally, unless we push back, which you are allowed to do, by the way, and I would advise if you feel like you can negotiate, certainly do that, says if there is a major structural issue, then it's the seller's prerogative whether they want to fix it or let you have your money back and go away.
Yeah.
Isn't that quite interesting how skewed that is?
Yeah, I know. So really, the only way a buyer can terminate a contract under that annexure is if the sellers turn around and say that they're not willing to fix those items.
So essentially, you think about a car. The car's been totaled, someone's fixed it, you find out it's been totaled, and say, oh, there's still some issues there. You can't just pull out and say, oh, I don't want it anymore, that's a really unsafe car. Even if you fix it, it's still not the way I want it. You can't do that with this house that you just purchased. The seller can say, yeah, right, there's a major issue in the roof. It's absolutely knackered. We'll fix it. You can't say, no, I don't want that anymore.
Yep.
If they want to fix it, you have to still buy it.
Yeah, so it does give you that reassurance that the works will be completed above board and by a licensed professional.
All right, let's talk about finance. Still a lot of people these days, young people, first-home buyers, are nervous that if they put in an offer with a deposit that's $50,000 and they don't get their finance, well, they've lost that money. I think we need to give that reassurance today about how the mechanics work with a finance clause.
Yeah. So if for any reason your finance is declined...
Even if you have a pre-approval?
Yep, absolutely. Your deposit is fully refundable.
They have to give it back within a couple of days?
Yes. The only reason that a deposit wouldn't be refundable is due to buyer's remorse.
You can't just pull out because you change your mind. You have to show either via a broker or the bank that you no longer can service this loan.
Correct.
Once you get that finance approval though, and you go unconditional, that deposit's also locked away, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that's where you really want to make sure that if you have a handy broker and you are a little bit unsure whether you've purchased that property, have a really strong conversation with your broker or your bank about what you can do, because that's probably your only way out is your finance clause.
Yeah, absolutely.
You cannot just turn around and say, oh, I don't want it anymore, I've paid too much.
Correct.
So once we are unconditional, once the contract is unconditional, The buyer is locked in. The seller has always been locked in. What happens from there? What's the settlement agent doing to help a client get to settlement?
We've actually already been in communication with the client from when the contract was opened up until finance is approved, getting them to sign our settlement documents. So we're in preparation for settlement once their finance is approved. So once their finance is approved, we'll request that they do their identification. We'll be in contact with their broker, ensuring that they've signed their loan documents. We'll ensure that their funds, if they're putting any funds towards the settlement, is sitting in the correct account. Usually the broker or the banker will be dealing with the first homeowner rate of duty forms. However, we will communicate that with the broker and the client to ensure that that has been done. We do find that, especially with our over east investors, if they're using a broker over east, they don't actually lodge the first homeowner rate of duty forms. So just making sure, ticking everything off so there is no delay for settlement.
Holding the hand along the way.
Pretty much.
You mentioned identification, and it's a funny one because I've seen on the email chains once every blue moon, we'll ask a client for identification to prove who they are, and they'll turn around and say, I don't want to do this, I don't trust this, I don't have to give you my license to buy a property. Why do we need to identify people when they're buying and selling a property, Jess?
Oh, there's just so much fraud out there at the moment. We're taking these steps to ensure that our client is safe, the property isn't being sold underneath them. It's very much in the best interest of the client that we receive and obtain these documents to ensure that they are who they say they are.
When you think about the selling side especially, we have to prove that you are who owns the property. Otherwise, it could be very much a Nigerian prince scheme going on. And the last thing that we want to happen as an industry or as a population is that people have those pathways to be able to fraudulently trade people's property.
Yeah.
And so it is really important that as an industry, this isn't even our choice, this is obviously industry standards, that everyone must be identified when buying and selling property.
Yeah.
How is it done these days? What's the current standard way that most settlement agents will be verifying people's ID? We know that you could bring your passport in and your driver's license. That's a good way to do it. Are there any higher tech ways?
I think ever since COVID, most settlement agents will use online platforms to verify their client. They're obviously safe platforms. We are currently using Scantech. It's a very secure platform, very easy to use. We'll send the client a link. They'll open the link, upload their verification of documents, so passport, driver's license, marriage certificate if required, change of name, take a couple of photos of themselves to make sure they are a real person, and then click go, and then we automatically get the link sent to us with their ID.
I think that's a lot more convenient than people having to come in, for example. There's a small charge that these services provide, but I think the convenience as well as the security is money well spent for people. And then we eventually do get to settlement. So what's happening a few days before settlement?
So usually about a week before settlement, 5 business days, the buyer will be attending and completing their final inspection. For a seller, making sure your discharge is in order and ready for settlement.
Of your mortgage?
Removing your furniture, pretty much packing up your house and making sure that you're ready for settlement. The house needs to be in the same condition as when the offer was made.
All right, it's a Monday morning today. Let's say it's settling on Friday. When am I giving you my money, or who am I giving the money to? Is it the real estate agent? Is it you? Is it someone else?
It really depends. If you're obtaining finance, there's 2 options. Either your broker or your banker would have nominated a shortfall account on your loan documents. If that's the case, you will need to ensure that the funds required for settlement are sitting in that account in readiness for the bank to draw down on the morning of settlement.
And who's telling you how much that is? Is it the settlement agent, the banker, both?
The settlement agent. Also, your broker and banker will have an idea of what's required for settlement, but we usually send our buyer clients about a week before settlement an amended statement, confirming the figures, confirming how much they need to have and in which account.
Okay, very good. So the money's sitting there in either the settlement agent's trust account or in the bank account, ready to go. It's settlement day. How do we make sure that everyone's ready? What's going on? How are we communicating between the buyer settlement agent, the seller settlement agent, the banks on both sides? What platform is being used?
We use an online platform called PEXA. It's a mandatory platform. All transactions are settled through this platform, bar the odd few. There's still a few transactions that need to settle via paper. However, most transactions are settled via the online platform PEXA.
Okay, so you're essentially working in a communal workspace where everyone's saying, hey, you ready? Hey, are you ready? Yeah, I'm ready. I'm not. Let's wait.
Yep.
And then eventually everyone's ready to go. A little bit of wizardry happens.
Yep.
Titles are transferred. Monies are transferred. Everyone's happy.
Yep.
How long does that process take normally? If we're settling on a Friday at 11 a.m., when is the property in my name and when is the money in the seller's account?
Settlements are usually booked for 11 o'clock in the morning. Depending on when all parties have signed off on the workspace, that's when the settlement process will commence. We usually say between 45 minutes to an hour for it to be completed. Funds are usually dispersed into the client's account the same day of settlement and the title transferred over.
That's pretty cool. It didn't used to be that quick, did it?
No.
So then if the money is in the seller's account and I've got the title in my name, when can I pick up the keys?
If the sellers were residing at the property prior to settlement, they legally have until 12 p.m. the day post-settlement to hand back the keys. If it was an investment or if the sellers have already moved out of the property, usually the keys can be collected the same day.
What happens if something untoward goes on? My bank's not ready, the seller's bank's not ready, I forgot to get the money in, the house isn't exactly as it was inspected, and there's a valid reason for us to delay settlement. Is there a little bit of a grace period in between? What happens if it drags on for weeks?
So there is. So all parties to a transaction have a 3 business day grace period should they require the extra time.
For any reason?
For any reason, yep. If they want to delay just because, or if the bank's not ready. If settlement doesn't happen within those 3 business days, depending on who's delaying, can invoke the right to charge penalty interest at a daily rate.
And what's that rate?
It's 9% of the purchase price minus any deposit of funds that have already been paid.
That's a bit of money.
Yeah.
It's nice to have those couple of days up our sleeve, but you really wouldn't want to be delaying over a weekend and past that grace period.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We've got the keys in our hand. We've moved in. What if there was some extra money left over? Does that money come back to me straight away?
Yes, we always like to hold a buffer, especially if there's a bank involved, because there's always bank fees. If there is a refund due back to the buyer, then those funds will be refunded to them at settlement.
FAQ question from the listenership that's been sitting in my inbox for a couple of weeks. A lot of people, especially who are buying investment properties these days or have got an accountant as a friend, they get given the idea that, hey, you should be buying your property in a family trust. They find that out after they've told their friend they bought a property and they decide to change their mind. The offer was initially signed in their personal name and then they go, oh, I want to buy in a family trust. Can we do that in Western Australia? Is it a bit of an issue?
Yes, it's very important to ensure that the entity that you're purchasing the property in is correct prior to signing the contract. If for any reason you want to then change the entity on the contract, especially if it's into a trust or a company, there could be double stamp duty implications.
What do you mean by that?
In WA especially, once a contract has been signed and accepted by all parties, to then change the entity can cause issues with OSR.
So they essentially go, look, the second it was signed in your name, we know we're getting some money off you for stamp duty. If you go and change that name, that's essentially like you selling it to another entity. We want stamp duty again.
Yeah, pretty much classified as an on sale.
That's a big risk. It's a risk for a lot of East Coast investors who don't have that issue over the East Coast. That just doesn't exist over there. But also, as we know, for people who just aren't in the know in Western Australia, first-time investors especially, who are thinking about making a bit more of a sophisticated buying entity halfway through as they get excited, do get caught with this. And we've seen it before, and it's not great when you're paying the government money that you didn't think you were going to be paying.
Yep. Absolutely.
Back in the day, people used to be able to settle their own property. Rock up at Landgate and say, hey, I'm settling my property. I'm going to represent myself. Can you do that these days?
You can, but it's highly frowned upon. We rarely see it. You might as well spend the $1,000 and have a professional settlement agent complete the transaction for you.
I think we see it once in 1,000 properties where someone's representing themselves. And I think that represents the value that settlement agents do add once people know that they exist.
Yeah.
A lot of people, when they've paid their mortgage off, or even when they just buy a property, they want the title, the certificate of title. They want to frame it and put it up in their house. Is that something that we still have these days?
No, actually, as of the 7th of August last year, Landgate stopped issuing physical duplicate titles for clients.
So if I wanted to rock up at Landgate and say, hey, I want a title, I want to frame it, is there a way to do that? A copy of the title maybe? You
can order a copy of the title from Landgate, but there's no physical title.
Isn't that really interesting? I guess moving to a digital world, we can't put our certificate of title up next to our university degree in the study. Another question from the audience, Jess, and we actually get this a lot with our client base. First home buyers, especially those who are a bit nervous about signing a contract and the complexities of it, they're often looking for a bit of help understanding what's going on. What should I sign? Should I not sign this? What does this mean? Do I need to put this condition in? A lot of those people end up calling us as settlement agents to be able to advise them on that side of things. Now, we're not lawyers. I know we do provide a lot of guidance along the way as to whether these contracts are standard or not, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can review a contract for a client, especially before they sign it, to ensure that the standard annexures and conditions are within that contract.
I think that's an olive branch that more settlement agents should be extending to their client base. If they're in conversation before the offer is actually accepted, and we have a lot of people asking for a quote before they've actually gone and put an offer in, which is great, to use us. Use a settlement agent to assist, not with negotiation, but at least understanding what you are negotiating.
Yeah.
And once you're successful, congratulations, you got that property under contract. Well, we know exactly what you're about to send us and we can move on it straight away. So early engagement, I think, is a really good idea to help you be as informed as possible and build that team around you. You've got your broker. Make sure you've got a settlement agent as well before you sign that contract to ensure you've got as much information as you need when you are signing it and you know what you're signing going forward.
Absolutely.
Jess, thanks so much for coming in, mate. Back to the office. Keep settling. I really appreciate you helping a lot of the people out today with these back to basics questions.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!